Hi there. You're at Alta Live. We're gonna wait a few seconds as this Zoom webinar fills in with our attendees. So please get settled. You can be like Joy and have a tea, or me with a gigantic Trader Joe's water.
Or
no
me.
sponsorship. Oh, Carolyn, a reusable water bottle. Hi, everyone. If you are here for a discussion with author Carol Edgarian on her latest book, Vera, you are in the right place. People are still coming in. I'm going to give it a couple more seconds. And as we do that, let's kind of formally begin. Hello and welcome. Thank you for joining us at Alta Live, our digital event series at altaonline.com. I'm Beth Spotswood, Alta's digital editor. Today, I'm very excited to welcome author Carol Edgarian. Carol is the author of the best-selling book, The 3 Stages of Amazement, as well as Rise of the Euphrates. She is the co-founder and co-editor of Narrative, a digital publisher of fiction, poetry, and art. And she's the co-founder of Narrative in the Schools, which provides free libraries and writing resources to teachers and students around the world. Her brand new book, Vera, takes us on a grand story of adventure as our heroine, the 15-year-old Vera, comes of age as she survives, it's incredible, the San Francisco Great Earthquake and Fire of 1906 and its aftermath. This exciting new book is going to be the subject of our discussion today. Carol's going to be in conversation with author, writer, and beloved and frequent Alta contributor, Joy Lanzendorfer. Joy's got a new book coming out herself, which called Right Back Where We Started From. And we're gonna share information about all of this with you. Before I let Joy and Carol run with the 1906 earthquake and fire, I do wanna mention Alta, if you're new to us, is a quarterly magazine focused on California and the West. We are gigantic and gorgeous, if I may say so. If you've joined us here today, you've registered with an email. And so fear not, I will be taking copious notes and send everyone who's here today a follow-up email thanking you for attending, along with links to the books we talk about, links to narrative, anything that comes up between Joy and Carol that sounds interesting to me, probably might sound interesting to you. I will keep you connected with all of that. So look for that later this afternoon. That email will also include a link to this conversation, which will be recorded. So if you've got to bolt out early or want to share this with everyone you know, fabulous. I'm recording everything, and we'll send that to you as well. Joy and Carol are going to talk for about 25 minutes. Please, if you've got any questions or comments, you can use the question button right below or our comment section. I'm going to pop back the last 5 minutes or so, and we're going to try and get to as many questions of yours as we can today. So without taking up any more time, let me turn this over to Joy, our wonderful moderator, and the woman of the half hour, Carol. Thanks.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. Thank you for having me here today. I'm so happy to be here with you, Carol, to talk about Vera. And congratulations on the novel. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you, Joy. It's great to be here with you, and congrats on your upcoming.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. Well, you know, I really was engrossed by this novel. And, you know, I found myself like, it's one of those books where when you're done reading it, you kind of want to go back and just kind of wish there was more so you could go back into that world. So I really liked it. So why don't we start out with you reading us a little bit of it, just to give the listeners a taste of what Vera is like.
Great. I'm just going to read the first page and a little. First things. I always thought of my city as a woman, but the house, it turned out, was a woman too. When the quake hit, she groaned. Her timbers strained to hold on to their pins, the pins snapping, and the rocks beneath the house, they had voices too. And if I ever wondered how long it would take for the world to end, I know, 45 seconds. An unearthly stillness preceded and followed the shaking. It's what we did and didn't do in the stillness that determined the rest of our days. I lost 2 mothers that year. The first was Rose. I can't say where she was born or where her kin came from. The fact is, I don't know what mix of blood flows through me. I suspect there's some Persian, possibly Armenian. I understand there may be some Northern African and Spanish in the mix too, and a good pour of French. Spanish by way of Mexico. None of this Rose would confirm or deny. We're mutts, she said, and left it at that. One of the harlots claimed that Rose had been found as a waif in the slums of Mexico City. For a fee, she was brought north. I believe that. I believe most anything when it comes to Rose. She spoke 5 languages, her hair was blue-black, her skin copper, her eyes green. In San Francisco, she became a much-favored prostitute, catering to the gold rush miners. Her next clients were the fellows who came after the miners, the suit-wearing bankers and merchants who thought they could gentle a murderous, gambling, whoring town. They thought they could gentle Rose. Instead, she became the grande dame of the Barbary Coast, the Rose of the Rose. She did not raise me. That duty fell to a Swedish widow employed to bring me up to be, I suppose, anything but a hooker. In that, Maury Johnson was successful. I am not a hooker. I am only a thief.
Love it. That's great. Great beginning. So as you say in that passage, Vera has 2 mothers, essentially. One is her biological mother, Rose, who is a madam who runs this house of ill repute. And the other is Maury, a Swedish woman who Rose has hired, essentially, to raise Vera. So Vera has these 2 women in her life, but she doesn't really feel loved by them, especially Rose. And this is kind of the core, one of the core emotional themes of your book, her longing to be loved by Rose in particular. So can you talk a little bit about where we find Vera at the beginning of the book, 15 years old, her family situation, and why Rose has chosen to put her child in this situation instead of raising her herself or giving her up for adoption?
Great question. Let me see if I can unpeel all that. Rose, you have to go back to the beginning of San Francisco and the city that's founded by miners, and the service industry that sprung up around the miners. One robust industry was prostitution. So Rose is not just any old former prostitute, now madam. She runs a grand house, a grand brothel. And therefore she has everyone's secrets, including all the businessmen in town. And in this very corrupt moment in San Francisco's history, where the mayor is about to be indicted on the morning of the quake, Rose is very much involved, has her finger in all the pies of graft and corruption. So one would imagine on one level, she has a child and she wants a girl, and she wants to preserve her possibility, Vera's possibility in the world. So she essentially buys her a mother, a foster mother, to take care of her, sets her up in a house in another part of town, and sees Vera only 3 times a year. You might imagine that Rose is perhaps being as good a mother as she can be by doing that, by providing. On the other hand, she doesn't want anyone getting in her way, and she's certainly not a maternal figure. Mm-hmm. And where we find Vera in the beginning of the book is she's 15, and she is she's contradictory by nature. She's smart. She's not a pleaser. In 1906, when society asks of young women to please, to hope for marriage, she is curious. She is also, though, her life is a contradiction, because on one hand she's provided for, but she's completely unloved, and even her adopted mother doesn't understand her, and Maury has her own problems. She's a gambler, she's a drinker, She's in a moment of crisis. So all these aspects are at play before the quake. There is a city, a mayor in trouble, all of that political moment, and a moment in society where you have two young girls, Vera and her sister Pi. One is very conventional, and our narrator, our girl, is very unconventional.
Yeah, and I love her voice, Vera. She's a little hard-boiled and jaunty. She says hell a lot and crikey, and she's sort of sarcastic. How did you develop this character? Did you just start writing in this voice, or was it more of a struggle to get a sense of who she is?
Her voice came early for me, and that often happens in my books. I hear them before I start to write. But the narrator of Vera is the much older, wiser Vera, very late in life. But then you have the character of Vera, who's 15, whose voice is different than the older Vera's voice, obviously, because she's only 15. And what was interesting for me is to watch young Vera's change, her coming of age pre-quake and post-quake, and how something as shattering as a quake changes you.
Right.
Changes everyone.
Changes everything.
It's not just about surviving. I think we're all feeling that right now, pre-pandemic. Who were we? And a year on, who are we? And we have yet to see who we become. But a crisis brings up everything. It brings up individually, you're challenged of what are you made of, but it also societally, it brings forward all those elements that were sort of bubbling underneath the surface. And that's something I really want to look at in the novel.
Well, so let's talk a little about the inspiration for the book. Why did you want to write about this topic? Where did you start when you started working on this book, creatively?
Yeah, I was always really fascinated with the earthquake. San Francisco is my adopted town, and now that I've written 2 novels about it, I think we can say it's sort of caught my fancy. This crazy town of hills and valleys, of microclimates, and of a storied past that includes incredible entrepreneurial zeal and optimism, and on the other side, it's always been overpriced. It's always been blindsided at moments by a kind of hubris that rules don't apply to us. That is always interesting to me. And that it sits on the edge of the world and at any moment can be crushed by a quake. And in this case, not only an epic quake, but a fire that reduced the vast part of the city to ashes.
Yeah, it's a city that has sort of repeated this history of boom and bust over and over and over again in different ways. I was thinking about the earthquake and how most of us know about the Great Earthquake, and most of us who lived in the Bay Area have probably experienced an earthquake at one point or another. But reading your book, I realized, that there is more to this disaster that happened in 1906 than most of us even think about. Like your book is really well researched. I can tell, and you bring up a lot of the things that they had to deal with, like they ran out of water. So there's all these people in crisis, and there's all this rubble and dirt and injuries, and they don't have any water, and so they have to start rationing water. And then things like the violence. The cops were shooting looters. They took the Chinese population and they rounded them up and kind of put them in camps where they weren't allowed to leave. So there's just a lot more to it than just there was a bad earthquake, even though that in and of itself is awful. But I'm curious, like in your research, what were some of the surprising things you learned about the earthquake? Did you have, did your sense of it adjust as you were researching it?
Well, there was so much in the research that I hadn't, like you, I didn't really understand the aspect of the fire until I really got deep into it, and the political aspect of what was going on around this quake. And to your earlier question about how I got here, I'd always read up on the quake. I didn't know I was going to put it at the center of a novel, but it when I started the book, it was in the lead up to the 2016 presidential election, and I was really feeling that um, our society was at a moment of not of a it was a precarious moment in our society when so much was coming to the fore and societal norms were really being busted. And I'm always drawn to like what is political, what is a moment of societal change, and how those moments are inherently dramatic, which they are, but also they allow for characters to kind of reinvent themselves. Some do, some don't. And so as the quake sort of came back in my mind as a metaphor for societal collapse, and I had this idea of wanting to write an adventure story that featured a young woman, because I think too many of our adventure stories are about young men.
Yeah.
And a woman who, even before the disaster, is an outsider. I'm in, you can look at Vera, and all of the characters are outsiders in one way or another, and all of them are thieves. And so how they navigate to survive, and then how they navigate to come together to form new bonds, to form new ways of being in the world. I thought that would be really interesting.
Yeah, it is. And I love that you included real historical figures in this book. You have the mayor is based on the real mayor who was embroiled in a huge scandal at the time, which is a big part of the book. You have Alma de Bretteville. Is that how you say her name? I'm not sure. Yeah, she's called the great grandmother of San Francisco, and she helped establish the Legion of Honor Art Museum. Arnold Gentha shows up, the photographer. So all these real people are in your book and just walking around. It's great. And so I thought it was interesting that you chose to fictionalize these real people. Why decide to go that route and include, the history so directly in that way?
Well, there are such amazing characters, real characters, and the challenge is to do research to bring these characters forward, but to bring them in a way that feels entirely natural to the reader. And one of the things I love to do is in reading novels, I love to go places I can't normally go in my real life. So for Vera, for example, to brush up against the great tenor Enrico Caruso backstage, like that was a really fun moment to imagine, and to put Caruso on stage, but to fictionalize it.
Mm-hmm.
So this idea of like the real world of San Francisco, what to choose that feels inherently rich and dramatic and important to the greater story, and then to put my fiction characters at play in this real world. That's both challenging and interesting.
Mm-hmm.
When you brought up Alma de Bretteville, who became Alma Spreckles, and I mean, she is an amazing character. She was the daughter of an impoverished Danish aristocrat. Her father didn't work. Her mother had a little Danish bakery in the front of their house, and in the back of the house gave massages to men. And she was a beauty, and she wanted to become an artist. And the only way she could pay for art classes was to pose nude. at the San Francisco Art Institute. And her claim to fame, she has many claims to fame, but early on, she was embroiled in a lawsuit with a minor who'd promised to marry her. And she sued him for some amazing, I think it was $50,000 for personal deflowerization. I mean, that was like such an incredible phrase.
Oh,
And on the witness stand during this trial, she said, "Pets, it's called screwing." And I mean, how can you not put her in a novel?
right.
And she went on to marry Spreckles, went on to live in the, build the mansion that Danielle Steele now lives in, and founded the Legion of Honor, and put inside that, she understood these impressionists artists early on, and bought their work, and bought Rodin's, and I mean, she's just an amazing San Francisco character.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the great things about your novel is it's kind of like there's a lot of little Easter eggs in there. If you know much about San Francisco history, there's a lot of that in there. I read somewhere that she coined the phrase "sugar daddy" because Spreckles had a sugar empire and she married him. And
oh, that's great. Yeah, I'd forgotten that.
I don't know if that's true or not, but anyway,
it should be. Let's agree it's true. It should be.
Well, I was interested in the fact that you named your character Vera. My book also has a character named Vera in it, which is, why I initially was like, when I was looking at upcoming books, I was like, wait a minute, a book about the earthquake in California with a character named Vera. And I know you have a Instagram live, is it, which is called A Word Please, and you talk about the etymology of different words. Are you planning to do Vera at some point? And why did,
I'm going to do it next Tuesday. Thanks for mentioning it. It's really been fun to take a word and go back to where it started and its story as a way to unpeel our current story and talk about poetry and fiction and story. I'll do it next Tuesday at noon Pacific time, and then it'll be but I chose the word Vera in part. It's a name that appears in many languages, and so when Maury and Rose are negotiating the transfer of this toddler, they want to pick a word that means something to both of them. But also Vera, of course, means truth.
Yeah.
And really the arc of the book is Vera finding what is true in this corrupt world, and finding what is true, not just in terms of her own moment to moment reckoning with a complex situation and world, but also what's true in her heart, and who is true.
Yeah.
And the people she ends up with at the end of the novel are not the ones she would have predicted, or I don't think readers would necessarily predict, but they're the ones who really show themselves. Mm-hmm. And I think in these moments of crisis, we're all, I know in my life, there's some recalibration of who are sort of the people you're coming out of this past year with.
Yeah. Wow. Well, I could ask you so many more questions, but I do want to say you're going to come on my radio show, What's the Story, which is on 95.9 FM, The Crush in Sonoma County. And we'll continue. I'll ask you some more questions.
Great.
So many to ask you.
Happy to be there.
Yeah. And so Beth, do you want to come back and share any questions that the audience might have?
I would love to. Thank you. Carol, that reading was fun. Thank you. Another Carol, is wondering if Rose was loosely modeled after a specific San Francisco madam.
Good question.
She wasn't. I mean, I certainly read about the madams, but Rose came to me sort of whole cloth. She's herself. She doesn't have a model, but she had to be real enough.
Lisa asks, with so many historic figures in the novel, were you bound by absolute facts Or were you able to pick and choose fiction and nonfiction?
My rule is where things are specific, they need to be accurate. But I certainly put these real characters in situations and put words in their mouths and moved them and imagined what they would do. I don't think the truth should get in the way of the story.
Lucy notes and asks, a quake is also a metaphor for a split, which also works for Vera having two mothers. Can you tell us about the two sides of Vera? How is she torn in two directions?
Oh, that's a great question. She's torn, I think she's torn in many directions. She's torn, that yearning you talked about, Joy, to be with her mother. Mm-hmm. That changes as the novel advances. What is the wish of a 15-year-old girl who is comfortable is not the same wish after she has been on her own and in fact has suddenly had to not just survive, but to provide shelter and food and everything for an entire group of adults. She's not the same person. So that really evolves. And I think the split for Vera moment to moment to moment is in trying to figure out in all that complexity what she feels, what really is true for her. And she's, I think characters really become real when we see not only their desires, but their vulnerabilities, where they're blind. And that's when I think as readers, we lean in, because we're trying to see for them. We're trying to see past them. We're hoping for them. And, if I can engage my reader on that level, I'll be really happy to see around the corners.
Yeah, it's sort of like how you can see other people's problems, but not your own problems.
Exactly.
Yeah, that human quality there is what makes the reader interested in a character, I think.
Well, and there's another character, the character of Tan, who became such an important part of the novel, who is Rose's Chinese butler, who at the start of the book, he and Vera are really at cross purposes and are even rivals, and how the evolution of their relationship, and also the evolution of them as characters, of that sort of wrong brightness in each of them, despite the gifts they have, what they cannot see and what they must learn to see throughout the book in order to live.
Mm-hmm.
Carol, can you talk a little bit about the research that you did for Vera?
I read everything I could get my hands on. One of the amazing things about the web is the huge resource of photographs from that period of time. They're all there. Firsthand accounts are there. In the acknowledgement section of the book, I sort of list what were the main places I went. I read a lot of the original newspapers of the time, because there's those little nuggets of detail that you just kind of don't know how they're going to work in this noggin over time. And I also, there's a great film that everyone should see, The Journey Down Market Street. It was a film that was shot literally within the week before the quake. And you see this robust city, you see the horse and buggies and the cars, and nobody's paying attention to anyone else on the street, how they didn't crash constantly. And people are walking in front of the cars and walking. And thank goodness they sent that film to be developed, sent it to New York a day or two before the quake. Mm-hmm. And then there's another film that's shot of the devastation of the quake, same moving down the cable car tracks of Market Street. And the before and after is, everyone should watch, because it's amazing to watch that suddenly within a minute, an entire civilization could just collapse.
I'm going to try and find those videos.
Yeah.
I'm happy to send you stuff.
Carol, last question comes from me. Will you ever be able to presumably survive an earthquake the same way again?
I have tubs. I have tubs in the garage, and my poor family, they had to live through. We have water. If you need, we have water. But I don't know if you're ever prepared. Are you ever prepared to be awakened in the middle of the night? You know, just all I can say is boots and gloves. That's what
you know what? Another link I'm going to do. I reviewed for Alta earthquake survival kits.
Fantastic.
I'll get you a link to that.
Fantastic.
People are asking where they can watch these videos. Our managing editor, Blaise Zariga, is popping up in the comments with the links already.
Hi, Blaise. Thank you.
So with that, I would like to let everyone know, first of all, thank you so much for coming today. Next week, we are going to continue the discussion with brilliant women, this time down in Southern California, where speculative Los Angeles editor and frequent Alta contributor Denise Hamilton will discuss her new book, a collection of essays, all speculative fiction about LA, with Alta's editor-at-large, Mary Melton. That is a week from today, March 17th at 12:30 p.m. And a big shout out, thank you to Carol and Joy for this conversation today. What a
Thank you,
treat.
Joy and Beth, and everybody at Alta. Thank you. This was fun.
It was. Thanks a lot. This was great.
Thanks for coming, everyone, and we will see you next time. Take care. Stay safe.
Bye.
Bye.